So I'm Eric from the Chromato team in London.
I'm Deep from the Chrome Speed Metrics team in Waterloo. We're working on the new Perfetto UI, and I guess we'll demo some stuff. And what we're also really interested in is learning about what TraceViewer features you currently use and how you use TraceViewer.
I need the meeting code to demo things.
Oh, it is
FEZ-IGYW-NPN.
Let's see if that works. All right. Cool. So we have this new TraceViewer UI that can already record traces from phones that run P and above. So you can configure a trace. You can configure a trace, including some system tracing categories that are supported by the Perfetto service on Chrome on Android, like scheduling details from the kernel, as well as some categories from Chrome that you can select, enable. Then, in theory, when everything works, you can record a trace from this phone. But you will see that this trace is going to be quite corrupted at the moment. I think probably because this phone is running development versions of Android that have a pretty weird service, weird tracing service on it. But yeah, it'll load the trace. Again, this UI is built on top of a trace processor that's written in C++ and cross-compiled into WebAssembly, which means that you can run this on your local workstation without uploading the trace anywhere. It also means that you can connect the UI to a trace processor that runs locally on your workstation if you want to, which makes everything a lot faster. So if you want to record like a trace that is multiple hours long, this is possible with Perfetto. You can then keep that trace file somewhere. You can't import it into the Perfetto UI because if it's multiple gigabytes, V8 will complain that like you can't allocate as much memory as you need in WebAssembly. But you can run the trace processor backend on your local machine and still connect the UI to it. So I'm going to kill this one, open a trace file that's actually neat. Yeah, you see some details from the system here, like CPU scheduling states and usage. All of this is built on top of SQL. You can, so whenever you zoom into the UI, running this on a Pixelbook, it still performs on a Pixelbook, which is pretty amazing. But as you zoom in, the UI will query for more details around the timescale that you have zoomed into and show you those details so you can see that Chrome was running here on these cores, whereas some other, like, I guess we're running, Chrome browser and Chrome renderer processes and other processes here, as well as the low memory killer. No, something else. Well, some other processes as well that make our life in Chrome quite hard, right? So oftentimes it's quite useful to see what's going on in the system around you, not just in Chrome, to figure out why certain things might be slow. Same, you can see existing trace events, can zoom into what's happening here as well. You'll see whether this thread was actually scheduled to run on a CPU or was idle at that time. And you can also find out why it might be running or not. So right now, the support for Chrome traces here is still a little bit rudimentary in the sense that you can see few details of slices of trace events in this UI. We're working on support for async event slices, for example. We're working on support for arguments. We're working on support for flow events. But we're not really sure which of the many features that are in Trace Processor in the existing Trace Viewer UI are actually useful to people. So if you have like, this is my workflow, I'm always using the metrics panel, or I need the layer tree or something like that, that would be really useful for us to hear about.
And from this UI, you can always go to the old Trace Viewer. So if there's a feature that you find that you were trying to use that isn't
there's this
here.
button here that converts the trace back into JSON and opens it in the legacy UI. So you can, right now you can fall back onto the legacy UI. The thing about the legacy UI is that it's using web technology that is deprecated, and we need to figure out if we can support it in the future. But I think our general plan is to replace the old Trace Viewer with this UI, keeping the features that are most used and considering porting others, I guess. A new feature that the old UI didn't have is that, as this is all based on top of this SQL model, you can actually enter into an advanced mode where you can query the trace model manually and see some details of what's in the trace from the UI, which is really cool. I mean, you can think of it like, I want to find in my trace certain periods of time that are interesting, or I want to find like see the ones see all the slices that are very long. In the future, we want to extend this even further, so that you've found a slice here, maybe you want to jump to it. So hopefully we can make it so that results from these queries can be transformed into, hey, I want to go here. I want to find what's here. But again, if you have like ideas for how we could make this even better, like what would you be using SQL queries in the UI for? Also good to hear about. Yeah.
I guess worth mentioning, our main reason for the SQL queries is to implement metrics, like timeline-based metrics on top of like you might have some examples down there, but it's basically a way to summarize the trace into a number that we can track, like frame rate or memory usage or something like that, and feed that to the performance dashboard.
This is the intent that the timeline-based metrics would be implemented like exclusively in SQL, like that's it. You just input a trace and a query, and then you output your metric.
Well, that's the direction we're working toward, but it's going to take a while to. I don't know if you want to.
Right, we want it to be in SQL as much as possible because it has some nice properties. Like we can very easily throw it on our dashboard and it just like runs the same way everywhere. We do recognize there are some use cases that's really hard to do in SQL. Like we have memory metrics that have like much more complicated graphs that are not representable in SQL very easily. So we'll have a C++ escape hatch to kind of drop into a lower level mode.
Cool.
And you're going to use this in Catapult, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and the SQL model that we're built here is also extensible to a degree, right? We've already started building some operators that extend the SQL capabilities here for things like, I think you can explain it better, but
like we've had new SQL operators like span join, which takes like intervals of times and somehow break it up into the segments that are non-overlapping, so things like that. Like the SQL operators that would be useful for dealing with time durations and slices that are generally not available in a general SQL language.
Yeah.
We'll have some of the same.
I think we're leaning towards features where metrics might want to follow the flow events through a trace, which is something that's still hard to express in SQL, even if you just have a flow table that like has like here's slice ID, to slice ID. So we will probably add helper operators that help you do common navigations, like I want to get the next slice or in my flow, or I want to find all the subsequent flows, all the slices in my flow till the end. similarly for like, I want to go to my parent slice, or give me all the slices in my hierarchy, or such things.
What's the workflow as a Chrome dev for using this if you're not an Android developer?
So right now, the import of traces into the UI works well with protocol buffer traces, which you can get out of Chrome already.
Using Chrome tracing, or what do you do?
Using, so now it gets into the very experimental features. So the workflow for recording traces manually will be to select the Chrome target platform here, which will work as long as you have an extension installed. It's a Perfetto UI extension. If you don't have it installed, it'll ask you to. So if I try to do this, incognito mode window, it'll ask you to install this extension. The extension connects the UI to Chrome, allows the UI to start tracing from Chrome. So you can now select only Chrome categories, because of course you're tracing only Chrome, not the system here. And then you'll get a bar in the browser, which tells you that you're tracing, I guess. And you can stop tracing and see the trace again.
It's just using the DevTools protocol.
Yes. Yes. So the extension API for it, but yes.
So, and I guess, is that the long-term plan? So we won't be able to go back to like the current Chrome tracing. You just click record trace and you don't have to install an extension.
Yeah, we will not go back to this because we can't really ship this UI in as part of Chrome. Like, this UI is more advanced. It's bigger. It depends on, it's a web app, depending on some node modules that can't really go through security review, such things. It's hard to ship this as part of Chrome.
Oh, shoot.
Therefore, because it is an advanced feature that also not every Chrome user needs, we will keep the UI, at least that's our current plan, hosted on ui.perfetto.dev. And you only have to install this extension once, then you've got the ability to record.
Okay. It might be nice to think about the workflow of like a Chromium developer who wants to write a new version of Chrome, and then they'll have to install the extension, and then they'll have to run a trace. Instead, in the past, it was you start your new Chromium build, you go to Chrome tracing, you hit the button, you're there. You don't have to go through an extension install phase.
Yeah. So one other thing that we were considering is to add a way to record a trace just into DevTools, like the DevTools front end, so that you have a button like, I want to record a trace, here's my trace config.
Oh, nice.
Then you'll just get a protocol buffer trace out of it, for example, and you can import it into the UI in your other browser or in the same browser, whatever. But
I think a use case like that is really important too, because at least back when I used to work on a lot of loading stuff, we would use tracing, like we would request traces from bug reporters like pretty often, just because like sometimes like a net log or something like that isn't rich enough. So like, if we have to like, if it's like very hard for an end user, like sort of like a technical end user, usually for people who file bugs, we should try to make it as easy as possible.
Yeah, so I mean, these would be these two options. Either you provide a config that you have to copy paste into DevTools and then it'll record for you. But alternatively, what we've also been thinking of is, you have to install the extension, yes. But once you've done that, you can share a link to the UI with pre-selected configuration options in the UI, and the user just has to click start.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
What about cases like some of our automated tooling, like Pinpoint and the perf dashboards that do work on traces?
Right. I mean,
it'll work. Yeah, we're doing that.
Oh, okay.
Like that's the plan.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Telemetry will start recording protocol buffer version traces from Chrome, and currently it'll convert them back to JSON for old catapult metrics. But based on those traces, those protocol buffer traces, we can then run TBMV3 metrics on them in telemetry.
For the local development case, you can also record traces using command line, like if you have a new build with a fresh profile, for example. Which,
I see.
Which can make things easier, and maybe we could like even give you the command line, like in the UI, for example, like if you want to run with this.
So then you don't need an extension.
Yes.
So, does the new tracing format unlock any new capabilities of things like slow reports, deep reports, like debugging crashes on end users' devices? Like, do we have plans in that area?
So we integrated tracing with UMA pipeline now. So just like we collect logs, UMA logs and upload, we also collect traces and upload from users. So we should be able to collect traces like we collect UMA metrics in the future. Because it's proto-based, it is easier for developers to ensure privacy rather than JSON-based blob that we just sent.
And performance-wise, like, what's the performance overhead of recording some of these new traces?
It's way less than the
current
system. Yeah, so you just record in the final format without any conversion.
Okay.
There's also, we don't use libprotobuf for all of this. There's a proto0 library that is particularly for just like streaming, writing proto traces. So it's rather fast to do that.
There are two other advantages. The proto traces are much smaller than JSON traces just because of the verbosity of the trace. The second one is we're able to get traces from dead processes now because we use shared buffer based implementation.
So like, could we imagine like a world when like you get assigned a crash bug and it comes with like a bunch of traces that we could like, that
would be really cool, right?
Yeah.
I think is one of the features that we want to implement at some point.
That would be amazing.
For renderers, it's very, for renderers, I think we're closer to getting there because at least, if you were tracing and you happen to be crashing a renderer while you were tracing, you should see that trace.
Yeah.
We had some fun cases when we were switching over suddenly telemetry metrics were regressing like by a lot. And it turned out it was because there were renders that were being killed as part of the page run, which we just lost all of that trace data in the past. Suddenly we had all the trace data and the metrics were like just summing up trace data.
But like theoretically, we could also have this for like browser, like full crashes, right? If we like somehow like look up the file on start and the next startup.
Yeah, in theory, I mean, Crashpad could extract this, right?
Yeah, so I guess, how are you using TraceViewer? What features are you using, right? Do you need flow events? I hope people say yes.
So, on the graphics metrics in the Viz team, as we're shifting things around between processes, we started adding more flow events, both as we were building out new metrics, as well as to debug like the new inter-process flow. And those are like exceptionally useful, especially tracking down like weird edge cases for like performance issues and user interactions. So yeah, those have been like invaluable.
Do you use I guess Viz is mostly compositing and scheduling, so you probably don't use the layer tree and SKIA information much.
We haven't used that much.
We use the quad tree though. Like we have a mode where we can record a trace with all the quads that get submitted.
Is that SK picture recording?
I haven't personally looked at SK pictures, but you still want the
geometry,
the compositor frame, like where the layers are, that kind of thing.
The 3D view of that.
Yeah, I don't think the 3D view worked last time, but
okay.
Arguments, you said, will definitely be implemented, right? So
I would also +1 flow events for the use case of like debugging asynchronous tasks that are like hopping between threads. Like I think the like task scheduling.flow category is like, I always enable it. So like even if we could just like special tasks like post task or special case post task, that would be really cool. It's very good for debugging.
I have a question about the SQLite integration. I don't know much about SQLite. Does it have like a JSON type that you can query, like a column that just has JSON in it?
So one thing is like it's built on top of like the data that it gets in the trace processor is just proto. So you already had a type thing. So it's simply just like normal SQL, simple tables. It's not like.
Yeah, but if the SQL table had like a column which was just arbitrary JSON data that we added to some trace event.
Yeah, but that's the issue with like arbitrary JSON data that we just added is the problem with like privacy. So to ensure that you have like, no, we know for sure this is gonna just be like this integer value with this name, and like that's why we have it in a trace. So
yeah, the privacy argument doesn't really apply to local traces.
For local traces, it's fine. Yeah, I mean, you can emit like proto format JSON.
So currently, we just put all the arguments that all the trace events have into this big table of JSON blobs, like you asked for.
Okay.
So there will be a better operator that lets you just access arbitrary values in the arguments. So that use case will definitely be supported.
Okay, because that would be very useful for people.
So just to add a little more detail, like SQLite does have a JSON extension that lets you do that, but that's not fast enough for us because it's like it doesn't index properly. But we will have an implementation of it that will work for this use case.
Yeah. Essentially, think of all the trace data to be part of a SQL database model, right? All arguments are going to be rows in some table that you can query using just regular SQL operations. But yeah, we'll add some convenience helpers on top of that.
Yeah.
Because of the lower overhead, you could potentially save a lot more data, like screenshots or like bigger objects, and have them show up here.
Yeah, because that's one thing we don't have today in like regular trace viewer. Can't really query the arguments very well.
Yeah.
Or at all.
Yeah.
I have like a general UI question about how the information is organized. I think with the legacy tracing UI, especially after site isolation launched, you start seeing like this explosion in the number of processes, and it's really hard to like, if you're doing a trace of like a full web page, like to actually target the process that you're looking at. And there was some work to like label the processes, name a little bit better in the UI, but like, I wonder if you guys have any thoughts on, I don't know, structuring it in such a way that we can kind of like dig into the like process tree to see the like actually like label subframes so you don't get confused and make sure you're like actually looking at the events in the right process.
I think to a degree we will, we'll add labels to processes, right? As you mentioned, the old trace view already has the ability to show the URLs that are being handled by the one renderer as opposed to the other renderer, right? The new UI has a few features like this one, where you can star a specific track. Like if you have found the right process that has your frame in it, you can pin it at the top and then compare what's happening at the same time. I guess that's
pretty useful,
sort of
actually.
related, not quite what you're looking for, I think, but
yeah, this is good feedback. I think we can definitely do a little bit more here.
Yeah.
Somehow, like showing more metadata with the processes, so you can filter quickly to the thing that you want.
Yeah, I think I actually have a BlinkOn file that I own that's like labeled the process names a little bit more, but I haven't had time to look at it. But yeah, I do think like better labeling like subframes, mainframes, even like labeling the depth that you are in the tree could be good, even if we still have like a linear view of processes.
One event that's really useful is like which frames were visible, and like just like a default sort to bring those at the top might help a lot.
Yeah, or even like a sort that like has the size, like is this the main content or is this like a small little like tracker iframe or something? And usually you can kind of see that, like a heuristic is just like how busy the thread is. But like if you could just like, sort by thread busyness or some other like heuristic, that would kind of be cool.
Are there the trace events for like this is visible, this is not visible anymore?
Yeah.
Special case things.
Yeah, there are async events for this.
Yeah.
You have to have enabled the right category, I guess. But
So I think a good thing would be then, as we approach the end, is for everyone, if you're got a trace, feel free to try it out in the new UI. Know that it's sort of experimental.
Yeah.
And be willing to hit that legacy button. But when you do, maybe make sure that we're aware of it on our timeline.
This is, at the moment, the import for protocol buffer traces works well. We will work on making the JSON trace import in the new UI also work well, so that you can import traces that you've already recorded. But at the moment, if you want to make sure that you see all the latest features, basically, just record a new trace from the phone, ideally. Or use the command line flags.
I was also curious, what do people use the different panels TraceViewer have? I heard one about the compositor layer tree panel that you use.
Memory infra, definitely.
Memory infra, okay. Are there other panels people generally use in TraceViewer? Because the timeline view, all of it will definitely be supported. The panels are something we might have to prioritize.
Another question is, well, actually, maybe we just do this, see what happens.
Yeah, the SQL one doesn't play well with the UI. If you have the SQL one up, it does the splash thing. If you don't have the SQL advanced mode, it doesn't do this.
Yeah, it's constantly being developed, this UI. So there's always something broken. But it's good to try out and see if something that you used to that you're used to in the old TraceViewer doesn't quite work the right way and you're missing it.
Yeah, we should probably create a hot list so that people can file bugs and see what other people have asked for features, so that we sort of have a burn down of what people are expecting.
Not sure if they finally added a button to
I know they had one.
For the bug, yeah. So here you go. If you're at Google, at least you can do this, because right now Perfetto uses internal bug analyzer to track things.
I think if we can add that to the old UI too, that's the big thing, so people know that their thing is getting deleted.
We should absolutely add some message there that says, hey, try out the new UI, the old one will go away.
Yeah, great.
Speaking of the old one going away, do we have any estimated savings? How big is that UI when you ship it in the binary?
Good question. I haven't checked that.
That could be a good 10.
Yeah.
Does desktop care about binary?
Yeah. Sorry, what?
Does desktop releases care about binary size?
I don't know.
Does desktop what?
Yeah, it does.
They care about binary size. We do measure it regularly, if that's the question, for desktop.
Well, binary size is also kind of security surface. So just removing another old code.
Yeah, well, we've been looking at what features to support. We've discovered that there are quite a few panels in here that we didn't really know about.
I think the Viz team uses the metrics panel also. I think they added it, right? So, right.
I guess in this case, we don't have all the things for it available.
I think smoothness is the one that.
Oh, I pressed the button.
So, I mean, for TPM v2 metrics, we won't be able to put those in the metrics panel, will we?
There is potentially a way to do this, but I don't know if we've decided on doing it or not.
The old metrics in the new UI?
Yeah.
Likely not. Likely not.
But are we still planning on having some metrics checked into the trace processor repos, that you will see those at least for each?
Yes, definitely. Any of the new style metrics that work with proto traces should be available in the UI.
The old metrics are so tied to the JS model and the legacy stuff that it's very hard to pull them out.
No.
But we have to decide whether we're going to support the new metrics in benchmarking, because we don't really want to have two different systems. So we're still figuring all of that out.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
So could we end up in the space where the main benchmarking tool is using metrics that are visible in the new Perfetto tracing?
We don't want to, but we have to decide what to do. So we'll talk.
I noticed there was a share button in the new UI. Are there any plans to support a deep linking feature so you could send someone?
Oh, I didn't demo this.
Yeah, support it.
This is one of the features that we were adding. Let's see if I find the right trace again. Was it
No.
plain text? Yes, maybe.
Is it always this slow on your
It's
Chromebook?
been a regression.
Yeah, I was about to
Yeah.
say, like, it's not this slow on my laptop.
It's also a Chromebook, right?
Still,
So there's, for example, there's this option of you can tag something here and give it a name. Like, here's my interesting event. In theory, I guess.
It was still loading. Yeah.
Right. So now you have interesting event here. You can zoom in, and when you click share, let's see if it works. It'll upload the trace, generate a permalink. And then if you open this permalink somewhere else, in theory, it should restore the state of the UI as you've been seeing it.
Yeah, if you like open certain processes and zoom into certain places, it should open at exactly the same place.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah, that's what I was asking for.
So, but so where's the trace file stored in that case?
On cloud storage somewhere.
I see. So I could go send that URL to someone else. So I could potentially leak personal information that way.
Yes. So, yeah.
Okay, cool.
Don't hit share.
Absolutely. That's why it tells you in this pop-up when you click share that this trace will be uploaded. And
oh, good. Oh, cool.
I just clicked OK because.
Yeah.
I think we have plans to support like uploading to like a drive somewhere so that you can have better control over like permissions. We don't have that yet, but something.
Yeah, I think we must have deployed a pretty sad version of this.
It feels like when you do like a debug build of the Perfetto UI, this is what it feels like.
This is what happens when you push a new version probably on Wednesday.
I see the slides is already preset, so it shows that it works.
Yeah, yes. In theory, if the trace were to load successfully, yeah, now we go. Oh, but it forgot it.
It has the instrument. It has the no line. But
Yeah, it seems to have forgotten it. So in theory, this should work, but it might have been broken recently. It's not something that we test all the time, I guess.
Okay.
yeah, I guess one more thing we're going to do is to send out a survey to everybody who might be interested. Please fill that and let us know what's important for you guys.
Okay.